where to start with 20 minutes on soil when I usually talk about it for days. And I excuse those in the room who might be geologists or soil scientists and have lots of information, but I'm going to go through some really quick things. So soil is made up of 95% that stuff that you can feel. So, you know, the sand, silt, clay, the mineral fraction that we have. And then there's also within that air and water, so gases and moisture. Not quite a lot as I'm used to in the top end, but yes, it does have those elements. And then there's another 5% portion of a general soil. So those in the room know what that 5% is. Doug's onto it. Thank God he's at the MLA and he knows it's organic matter. So 5% organic material, probably like it is the smallest fraction, but it's the most important fraction. Because we can't do any amendments to our soils, having organic material within our soil is going to benefit it. And I'll talk about a little bit of this. So this is what we call an aggregate. And a lot of your soils, you'll see the topsoil there, it's quite loose. It's not aggregated together. The thing that brings a soil together is that organic fraction. So you need the organic material and you need the microorganisms acting in the soil because they will break down and decay that plant material. And those glues and humus that they excrete and that they make, those compounds, will bind the soil particles together, the sand, silt and clay. So if you've got those together, if you've got enough organic material in your soil, you will have a strong aggregate strength. I do have some water, if you've got a water bottle and you pop one of these into a jar of water, it will do exactly what we don't want it to do. And this is why the landscape rehydration, could you be my water boy, please, Ian?
Oh, you want some water?
Just steal that person's, that's fine. Sorry about that.
All right.
So, this is what we call a slaking test. So you pop one of these little aggregates and straight into the water, and if we had a zoom-in camera now, you'd appreciate that. So it's completely fallen apart, and that's what we call slaking. So that means that these aggregates, again, have no strength. So there's a little bit of pressure on them, they fall apart. Any water, they fall apart. That's not cool. That means that every time you get a half-decent amount of rain or it pools, it's going to slake like that and you're going to lose it. So really fragile, and that's why management's so important. The things that will keep it together, and some of you may have examples of aggregates in front of you that have some roots within it. So has anyone got a little clod of soil or aggregate that has some roots holding it together? So you're not going to be able to see this. This is like television stuff. But this is a great example of organic material holding. Can everyone see that? So that has been formed by some sort of macroorganisms. I'd like to say worm, but I don't know how many worms you get around here. Maybe in a good season. And that's the other thing, that rainfall variability is going to affect that. The wetting and drying, obviously microorganisms can't act in an environment when it's dry. They need water to be able to operate and move through the soil water. So when you've got good times, these guys will be all acting on that mulch. So another reason to keep that mulch there, it rains, it pushes into the soil profile, it initiates the microorganisms, they can get to work, then they break down this, and guess where your nitrogen and phosphorus are coming from? The broken down organic matter. So you can't add a bag of fertiliser out to your rangelands, but you can encourage organic matter by keeping plants in the soil and all their decayed material and just keeping that nutrient cycle as consistent and positive as possible. The other exciting little thing we have here today is, and some of you may have experienced it at the soil symposium that we had recently, and this is what I was collecting at the Botanic Gardens as well as out in the field. So Aileron, Sarah and Craig will be happy to know that they have biocrusts. Has anyone heard of cyanobacteria or biocrust before? So they're not physical crusts. You will get physical crusts, and feel free to come and have a look at them. When you're walking out, and there's plenty of them when we were out there yesterday, they look like a little stain, like a blackened stain, and maybe a little bit of curling, like a crust. You might stand on them and hear that crunch under your feet at this time of the year. They just look like a black stain on the soil, like maybe a little bit of a clay physical crust. But what happens is they'll get moist, so they'll be just sitting there dormant during the dry season. Once they receive rainfall, they'll initiate, and these little guys are responsible, and this is research from Dr. Wendy Williams, which is also another MLA project, and she found that there was over 5 kilograms of nitrogen delivered per hectare by these little guys. So that's another example of, yep, I can't afford and I'm not going to be able to do any of that, but I've got my organic material by, maintaining as much pasture as I can by not disturbing that mulch layer. And if I see crusts, that's a good thing. That's not something to be scared of. And you can see that they're starting to green up. As soon as I add water, they green up. They don't create a barrier. They actually are, if you have a look under a microscope, they're like a whole lot of little webbing of roots and things that'll infiltrate moisture straight in. Then they can start delivering that nitrogen. So they're photosynthesising, just like all your other plants. Where to now? You do know about, I know Alison touched on it, but the reasons our soils are so infertile and why this is really important is these rocks. And that's where our mineral fraction comes from. And these rocks have been changed and undergone cycling for many, many, many millions of years. In fact, 1,800 million years old, some of these guys, and then probably changed a couple of times in that time as well. And then exposed to the elements over that time. So we don't have very nutrient-rich soils. And where are the best soils that we do have in Australia? Anyone?
Volcanic areas.
Where?
Volcanic areas.
Volcanic areas, very good. Jumping ahead. So that where we've had previous hotspots and volcanoes on the east coast of Australia. We haven't had any volcanic activity around here for a long, long time. So that's where our richest mineral soils will form from volcanic soils. But we don't have them. Liverpool Plains, Darling Downs, hotspots along the eastern seaboard. So you're dealing with very old parent material, which turns into soil, which then has to live in a very hostile environment. But when plants will grow, and the other good thing, I suppose, if you can draw some good stuff about it, is that it's got high infiltration rates for most of it, for your lighter soils, which are, dominated by sand. So if you've got high infiltration rates, it means that any small amount of rain, so I think Chelsea said you're not going to get too excited about 10 mils, but I'd be getting pretty excited about 10 mils in something like this. Am I right? It's a start. Most things should respond to it. You should get some sort of response. It's the follow-up rain that would be very helpful, but 10 mils is going to get into my ground because it's a sandy, light textured soil. Your harder country or your heavier country, like your clays, probably going to want more like 30 to 40 mils to get any sort of pasture response. But Alison will help you if I've said anything incorrectly. So you're probably better off talking to the local legends rather than just the blow-ins. So I guess from here, there is one other soil sample I did take yesterday, and that was down at the creek. So most of the stuff that you've got now in your hand that's very weak, falling apart, has not a lot of stability. Then I got to these exposed areas that were on the creek line. So where we'd had that erosion, it actually exposed your lower horizons of soil. And this is maybe your B horizon or your subsoil, and it's hard as a rock. I can't destroy that with my hand. I probably need a larger container to see what it'll do with water. But that's the movement of clay as it gets washed through over many, many years. Obviously, it's going to take a long time. But the smaller fraction, mineral fraction, the clays in the soil, of what there's not a lot of, will feed down into that profile and accumulate and then form these hard concretions. So not good to see that exposed. It does mean that there is quite an amount of erosion down at that dump area where that creek line was. So I haven't filled my 20 minutes, and there's probably plenty of other things I could tell you. Talk more about cation exchange capacity of clay soils, but because there's not a huge amount of clay in your soils here. I don't want to, disappoint people, but not all clays are created equal, and certainly your clays would be highly eroded and not hold. So that means when you do get nutrients, they're not going to be held on. So if you do get really heavy rainfall in these light soils, you are going to probably push a lot of the nutrients down through the soil profile and lose them. So it's, I don't know how many of you have got veggie patches, but, adding small amounts more often would be better.